podcaster. Welcome to the Podcast Mix. Podcast Mix. Hello, podcaster. I'm Nick, and welcome to the second episode of the Podcast Mix. In this episode, I'm going to talk all about podcasting equipment and also go into a simple explanation of soundproofing your room and acoustical treatment, which just means stopping echo from happening. The 7 things in this episode that I'll talk about are audio interfaces, microphones, editing software, options for recording people anywhere in the world, headphones, soundproofing your room, and how to stop echo. There's going to be a downloadable PDF that you can get from the website, so make notes if you want. I recommend you do, or go grab the PDF, or do both, whatever you want. If you have a question while you're listening and want answers right away, go down to the description, pick a way to get in touch and ask. Okay, number 1. The most important thing you need to do to ensure a clean, quiet, high-quality recording is to acoustically treat the room you're recording in. What does that mean? It just means setting up your room so that the sound of your voice doesn't bounce off the hard surfaces like the walls and get recorded, which will just sound like echoes when you're talking. In the PDF for this episode, there'll be a link to a video by Cinecom that will outline the best way to do this easily and for cheap. Now, that video might seem complicated to you, so if you check out the video and decide that you don't want to set your room up like that, you can find other ways to control the echoes by using heavy blankets, soft cushions or pillows, or any soft, plushy objects. Just try to set them up close to your microphone. What for sure you want to avoid is recording in a room with a lot of hard reflective surfaces, like in a bathroom or a kitchen or garage. Controlling the echoes in your room is definitely the best way to get a great recording. You can buy the best, most expensive recording equipment available, but if your room isn't set up to stop echoes from happening, your podcast still won't sound as good as you want it to. The second most important thing you need to do is soundproof your room. Now, soundproofing actually means to stop noise from outside the room from getting inside the room. The real way to do this is really complicated and expensive. There's really no need for me to go into all of this, but there are some seriously important things everyone should and can do to stop noise from getting recorded in your podcast. Now, what I mean by noise is anything you can hear while sitting quietly in the room you're recording in. You listen to the first episode, I taught you an easy exercise to check if your room is quiet enough to record in. So let's do that again right now. Stop what you're doing and listen. What do you hear? Everything you can hear will be recorded. So here's 8 tips to make sure you get the cleanest recording possible. And all that really means is removing things from the room that make noise. If your computer has loud fans, use a long cable and move your computer out of the room, or at very least, move it as far away from your microphone as possible. Number 2, unplug the fridge during the time of recording if you're recording at home or in a house. Even if you're on a different floor, the fridge causes so much noise and it actually vibrates the entire house. Now, don't worry, just keep the door closed and your food will be fine. It won't be unplugged long enough to ruin any food. Number 3, turn off the air conditioner and furnace during the time you're recording. You'll hear this no matter where you are in the house. Number 4, if you live or work in a heavily traveled area, schedule recording sessions during quiet times like in the early mornings or at night. Number 5, even wall plugs can cause issues. So I suggest investing in something called an AC line conditioner to make sure the electricity running your audio equipment doesn't cause problems. Lights, appliances, they all contaminate the electricity coming out of your wall plugs. Ask me about this if you want to learn more. Sometimes if you're having issues with your audio, it may be coming from the outlet in your wall. Number 6, when you set up your mics and equipment, make sure all your audio cables are running parallel to themselves and not crossing over each other. You don't want them to be perpendicular to themselves. I know this is weird, but there is a reason for this. And to avoid any problems, just make sure they're running lengthwise, parallel with each other. You don't want a whole rat's nest of cables around anyways. It's just much nicer to have them lined up with themselves. Number 7, remove any jewelry or articles of clothing that make even the slightest bit of sound. Heavy jackets, winter jackets even do it. Bracelets, necklaces, some earrings. Make sure you take them all off and that they aren't jingling or making any kind of noise. And finally, number 8, make sure everyone's phones are on silent. It's important to let your guests know this as well. If you're going to be recording remotely, let them know ahead of time that they should put their phone on silent, and they should also take any jewelry or clothing that will make noise. People don't think about this one. You can even draft a checklist to send to your clients before your scheduled recording session so that they know what to expect and they know what to do. And they'll also appreciate it because they won't be causing problems in the middle of recording or anything like that. I can't emphasize this enough. The quality of the equipment you buy is secondary to the room you're recording in. How quiet your surroundings are makes up for 80% of how your podcast will sound. The quieter and less echoes there are in the room, the better. The audio interface is a small box or small mixing board that plugs into your computer that will make it easier to plug your microphones in. It'll connect to your computer using a USB cable, which are always included when you buy it, so you don't have to buy it separately. Every one of these interfaces comes with weird-looking plugs on them. They're circular with 3 small holes in the center. These are called channels. The channels are what you plug your microphones into. So, knowing that you need 1 microphone per person being recorded, you need to make sure that you get an interface that has enough channels for the number of microphones you need to plug in. Once you have the interface attached to your computer, you'll then have to open the audio editing software, which we'll talk about later, and set it up to work with the interface. Now, this sounds hard, but it's not. Every interface will come with instructions that will help you set it up with your editing software. There's also tons of YouTube channels that will walk you through this process for virtually any interface and software you can buy. The tutorials that you can find on YouTube will quickly walk you through what you need to do to make sure the interface works with the software. If I were to suggest an interface to buy, I would say a good cheap option is by a company called Behringer, and they have a line of interfaces called the UMC, or the Euphoria line of interfaces. I'm going to link to this stuff in the PDF so it's easy for you to find. Now, an alternative option to the audio interface are standalone recording devices. These devices have built-in channels for your microphones and will record to a memory card instead of a computer. This option works best for the people who might be recording their podcast while on the move. All you need to do is plug in your mic, hit record, and go. Then, when you want to edit the episode and finalize it, just pull out the memory card and transfer the audio to your computer so you can import it into your editing software. Some of these devices even double as an audio interface for extra flexibility. The catch with these, though, is that they are the more expensive option to go with, but they are worth exploring because the extra cost might be worth it for you. If you're interested in this, I'd suggest looking into the Zoom line of recorders. Again, I'll link to this stuff in the PDF. Okay, so microphones. There are so many microphones to choose from that range in price from $20 to over $10,000. I've got 2 very simple and basic suggestions when it comes to microphones. So to help you choose one, let's narrow it down. Although there are many types of microphones, the 2 I'll talk about are called condenser microphones and dynamic microphones. And to quickly make this even easier, stay away from condenser microphones, especially in the beginning. So that leaves dynamic microphones. Now, this podcast isn't designed to go into how dynamic microphones work and why you should pick them over everything else. So I'll narrow it down even more to just 2 specific brands and models. The first one is the Shure SM58, which everyone has at least seen in person and probably even used at some point. The SM58 is that microphone you see people using on stage all the time. It's a great option and is really affordable. They've been manufactured for decades and are the go-to for almost every live situation, and they make a perfect microphone for podcasting as well. The other suggestion is by a company called Audio-Technica, and it's the model ATR 2100. This is even cheaper than the SM58, and it'll still do the job no problem. I have a very in-depth article about microphones and get really technical about how they work. So if you're interested in learning more, let me know and I'll send it to you. But when it comes to microphones, all you have to do is choose one of those 2 options, the SM58 or the ATR 2100. They both will work with any interface and you'll get great quality out of them. A few things to note about microphones are where they're placed and how you're talking into them. Both the microphones I mentioned pick up sound best from the front and the least from the back. So knowing this, when you're recording and there's either someone else recording with you or there's something noisy in the room, make sure to set the microphone up so that the back, where the cable plugs in, is facing the source of the noise. Doing this won't completely prevent unwanted noise, but it will greatly decrease the chances of running into problems. Also, when you're talking into the microphone, you'll record the most balanced and natural sound by having it approximately 3 to 4 inches from your mouth and slightly off center. Make sure you're not too close or you'll get something called proximity effect, and that's something that you don't want either. If you need to handle or move the microphone while you're talking, only handle it from its body, not the circular mesh part on top, the part that you're speaking into. The last thing that you'll have to look into when you're buying your microphones is a stand. The ATR 2100 comes with a tripod table stand and a mic clip, but the SM58 doesn't. So for the SM58, you'll have to buy a stand separately. Now there's 2 types of stands to choose from. Both will work with either the SM58 or the ATR 2100. There's the table stand, like the one that comes with the ATR 2100, or there's a boom arm that attaches straight to your table. The boom arm can position your microphone a little easier than the table stand, which is something that you might prefer. Both of these stands can easily be found on Amazon. I personally would recommend going with the table stand because it's just easier to set up and take down and put away. Audio editing and recording software. What editing and recording software lets you do is control the sound your mics are picking up before, during, and after recording. There's 3 brands that I recommend you choose from. 2 are completely free. The 2 free options depend on what type of computer you're using. For Mac users, you already have an audio program called GarageBand that's been preloaded, and you won't have to pay any more money for it. If you're a PC user, there's a free option available that you'll need to download separately called Audacity. I recommend starting with one of these so you can get used to how editing and recording software works. The third option is called Reaper. This one isn't free, but you can buy the full version for under $100, which is a great deal. They all do the same thing at the same quality. They're just laid out differently and vary in how user-friendly they are. Now, remember, before you can start using any of these pieces of software with your microphones, you have to set them up to work together. And how you do this depends on what interface you have and what software you have. There's no way for me to know what you're using, so just Google how to do this. Guaranteed there's a ton of easy-to-follow tutorials on YouTube. Next, I'll talk about remote recording. Let's say you're at home somewhere in California, but the guest you're going to be interviewing or your co-host is in Toronto. How do you record them? Well, there's online conferencing services that allow you to connect with people remotely. Most of the time, these services work by creating quote-unquote a virtual room in the cloud that 2 or more people connect to do video conferences. A lot of these services also allow you to record these conversations and download them to your computer when the conversation is finished. Most of these services have free basic accounts that you can sign up for, and even though the accounts are free, it's usually more than enough functionality for recording your podcast. I usually recommend looking at 3 options: CleanFeed, Zoom.us, and Squadcast. There's a ton of other options though. Discord works, Zencaster works, Ringer works, or if you've heard of one that I didn't list, go ahead and use that one. I'll include a list of these in the PDF and you can choose whichever one works best for you. With a bit of research, these are really easy to use for recording your podcast, and they all have amazing tutorials right on their website to get you started super quick. The last piece of equipment I recommend getting is headphones, which isn't rocket science. You just need to be able to hear what you're recording, check your levels, and make sure your equipment is working properly at all times. The brand I usually recommend to people is Audio-Technica, and the model I always recommend is the M20X. I personally have a pair of M30s, which are discontinued now, but I've had them for well over 10 years, and they are still my daily drivers. I consider them the best investment I've made in terms of equipment, and I have no doubt that the M20Xs are just as good. So that's it. That's all you need for a basic podcasting setup. If you follow these recommendations, your podcast will have a great sound, and more importantly, you'll run into way less problems with your audio. I'll have links in the PDF for this episode to the equipment I've mentioned so you can find it easily. Of course, you're probably going to have questions, so please get in touch and ask. I want to talk to everyone. And if you have questions right now, before you get started, or maybe you're in the middle of planning what equipment you're going to buy and need some help, or if you want to make sure we include something specific on future episodes, go right now and get in touch. Here's how. Mic Me Audio or The Nick Parry on Instagram. Mic Me Audio on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. MicMe.com on the web. And get me directly via email at nick@mikeme.com. All these will be linked in the description to make it even easier for you to find me. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Podcast Mix, a Mike Me podcast, and I can't wait for you to launch your podcast. Come on!